All right, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We're talking to Buckeyes tonight. We got Claire Crawford on the line. That is Buckeye Claire. You got to join her on Twitter, Buckeye Claire. No E. No E. Don't do it. Claire, how you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm doing so great. I'm nice and cozy and warm inside my house. I'm not daring to brave this weather.
Oh my goodness. It's brutal. And unfortunately, it's extra brutal for some unfortunate individuals out there who have to really brave the cold.
Yeah.
Life situation, job situation, whatever the case might be. I am glad to see you wearing your Buckeye red.
Of course.
Looking good.
Thank you, sir. It's it's one of those things where, after as a true Buckeye fan and as a superstitious person, I really am not permitted to wear maize or blue during at least the month of November. And sometimes if you're really serious, just between like September and February, just to make sure.
I am fairly safe, Claire, because I don't own a lot of yellow. You probably have, if you've noticed at all, my wardrobe is pretty cut and clean. A lot of black, a lot of navy blue, a lot of gray, pretty consistently. All right, Claire. How do I ask this as a gentleman to a female without the obvious age connection?
Yes.
How long have you been a Buckeyes fan?
Well, I am proud to say how old I am because I feel like I don't really, I've led a good, clean life. So I'm 39 years old. There's not a time where I can remember where I wasn't a Buckeye fan, but there are moments in my childhood that are just indelible where I spent with my family. That really kind of solidified that for me. There was never a chance that I would ever really, flip to the dark side. That was not permitted in my family. But I remember as a child sitting in my grandmother's house, and my grandfather attended Ohio State. He's an alumnus, and back when it was an agriculture school, and he ran a dairy, and that was his plan. And he was this brilliant man. So we're sitting in my grandmother's house, and the chimes that played on her clock every hour on the hour was the beginning to Carmen, Ohio. And I remember asking her one day, I can still hear it, just the exact tone. I remember asking her one day, Grandma, what song does the clock play? What is that? And that's when she told me what it was, and I'll never ever forget it from that point forward.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, when it comes to sports, when it comes to holidays, those two things in particular, tradition is just even more special, and family. And I must be a loner by nature. I never thought of myself that way, but when it comes to favorite music, when it comes to favorite musical artists, I should say, when it comes to my sports loves, people will ask me, oh, well, where did that influence come from? And I'm like, I don't know. I came up with it all by myself. I had no family influence in becoming a Buckeyes fan. None.
So it's kind of funny because, and I actually told this story at an Agonis Club meeting, and one of my very favorite people in this whole world was there, Jack Park. He's a Buckeye historian, so if you're a Buckeye fan, you'll know exactly who Jack Park is. He wrote the encyclopedia, the Buckeye Football Encyclopedia. He just came out with a new book. He's just one of my favorite people, and I spoke at this luncheon from the perspective of being a woman and speaking on sports as a woman. And there was someone that approached me, of all places, at the gym, and said, "Hey, I listened to your show. I really enjoy it. You really know your stuff." And I said, "Wow, thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Keep listening, and thanks." And he had to take it one step further, and he says, "So did you learn your football knowledge from your dad, or did you have like an older brother to teach you?" And it's funny because no one would ever ask you that question, even though you just volunteered that information. You just kind of became a Buckeye fan on your own and started loving football on your own. But and I realized that I'm in the minority and I'm kind of a rarity, but not really around Columbus, Ohio. We're in the mecca of college football. And his intent was not to hurt my feelings, and it came from a place where he didn't understand that what he was saying was rather insulting. And I got my back up for a second and wanted to get defensive. But in reality, I love Buckeye football because I've just always been passionate about it, about the sport. It's part of the fabric of my family and the foundation of almost my identity growing up. And it's time that I got to share with my father, who worked his butt off day and night. He allowed himself to watch a few Buckeye football games on the couch. So it wasn't until I was an adult that I actually got to attend a game. But I sure do have fond memories behind it. And no, my dad taught me plenty of things about football, but also playing football in one shape or another for the last 15 years now, taught me more about the game than I could ever possibly translate from a book. So
Yeah, if anything, I influenced my family to become Buckeyes fans. They became Buckeyes fans after I'm the youngest, and I influenced all of them to become Buckeyes fans. So what we have here, Claire, is we have a book, the Ohio State football, The Great Tradition by Jack Park.
That's a very great book.
And so inside here, we have an autograph there by Archie Griffin.
Oh, how cool.
Yes. To Mark, best wishes to a great Buckeye fan. Go Bucks.
Man,
yes.
Cool.
That was very cool.
I have that book, and I actually had Jack autograph it for me, and it was supposed to be a gift to my husband at the time. And I gave it to him, and it sat on the shelf. Now, he is a huge Buckeye fan. I'll never take that away from him. He and I had a lot in common when it comes to that. But the book, he never cracked it open. It sat on the shelf for about a year. And so finally I thought to myself, you know what, I'm going to read it either way. And I soaked it up cover to cover. And then about 6 months later, there was a contest on the radio where they were asking for Buckeye fans to prove, their knowledge. They were going to have this trivia contest for a local radio station. And I was like, I got this. Like, I know I can do this. So I went head to head with someone at the radio station for the first round and won. And then the next round was live in person at this big Buckeye party the night before the Michigan game. And I ended up winning out of, I think, maybe 30 or 40 people. Won tickets to the Ohio State Michigan game in 2006. So that was pretty special.
Yeah.
And that was a pretty special day to get Ohio State Michigan tickets. And I at least can prove that I don't just have current Buckeye knowledge, but I really do love history behind Buckeye football. And it's part of the reasons I love Jack too.
Absolutely. And what's interesting about this situation was that I was working in Central Ohio, I guess it's called, Ashland, Mansfield area. It was my first TV job. And I went to the Buckeye Bash before the Michigan game, and Archie Griffin was there. And yes, my wife at the time had it autographed by Archie Griffin and then surprised me at Christmas. So she actually worked all that and then gave it to me at Christmas time. Then what's kind of coincidental is that was in 1992. 3 years later, I was 3 to 5 years later, something in that range, mid-90s. I was the sports director at a CBS station in Mississippi. Archie Griffin was in town and was the special guest for the Fellowship of Christian Athletes.
Yeah.
And for that, did I tell you this story once?
No.
For this particular Fellowship of Christian Athletes, they just happened to ask me by coincidence. It wasn't like, Mark's a big Buckeyes fan, Archie Griffin's in town. It was just they would ask different people in the area to host the banquet, and they just happened to ask me the same occasion that Archie Griffin was in town, and so I got to host the Fellowship of Christian Athletes banquet the night that Archie Griffin was in town. And what I did that afternoon was somebody or something gave me the idea. You know what I'm going to do? And he was so gracious. It was amazing. I asked Archie Griffin to leave his hotel, come to the TV station, and I had him on. I hijacked a Mississippi centralized sportscast for the entirety of the sportscast. I said nothing else about any other sport. I don't even know what was going on that day. And I sat in the newsroom. I didn't sit on the set. I had the camera people and so forth, the production people. I said, I wanted to do my sportscast in the newsroom, just sitting there with Archie Griffin. And I just sat there and talked to Archie Griffin for like 5 minutes on the air. And that was my sportscast.
Well, you can't miss that opportunity if you were.
Oh, it was phenomenal.
Oh, man.
Even though I'm guessing that a pretty large portion of the audience watching me was like, okay.
Right? Like, what is happening here? Where did this come from?
So that was very cool.
My around the same era of football player, like I mentioned my dad earlier, and my dad's a really hardworking guy and sold cars for a lot of years and worked 12, 14, 16-hour days sometime. But one of the guys that worked with him was Pete Johnson. And Pete Johnson was obviously a famous fullback at Ohio State and held scoring records for, maybe 30 years.
Scored 25 touchdowns one year.
Yeah. And I just have such fond memories of Pete being around my family. And he was such a lively person and obviously, carrying the Buckeye flag as strong as he did. And I remember the respect that, my dad had for him and what he did in the community. He's a really fun guy. So that definitely, I can point to that as at least as a child and say Pete Johnson had a part to play in it. And not until I was an adult did I realize even, obviously I looked up to him because he was an adult and he was my father's friend. And I knew he played football for Ohio State, but not until I was an adult did I realize, his infamy.
We've got Claire Crawford on the line to talk Ohio State football, just kicking around whatever comes to mind, running down memory lane with Buckeye Claire. Do you have a favorite player? Is it possible for you to pin it down to one player? Or a top three or a top five?
Okay, so my buddy Joe Dexter and I, he was on our podcast, Oh Hail No, which I'm still going to hang on to that name as long
Absolutely.
as
It's just the best.
It's so perfect. He and I have gone round and round about like our all-time teams for a long time. And I will say it's usually a toss-up between two. And Chris Spielman is really high on my list, if not number one, just because of everything he's ever done, not just from like a philanthropic standpoint, but his intensity as a person and his, just fervor and his ability to be so passionate about everything that he does and put 100% into everything that he does. I mean, it's part of his upbringing. He comes from this amazing football town here in Ohio, just this infamous football town. And, obviously what he went through with his wife, Stephanie, and the sacrifices that he made and his faith. I'm a huge Chris Spielman fan. I've been lucky enough to work with him here locally a few times with our local ESPN affiliate on that radio station on the Fan. And Archie is a close second if he's not up there already for very similar reasons. But I think Chris is going to hold that title for a long time.
There are more talented football players, but when I think football player, just the epitome of a football player, it's Chris Spielman.
Yeah.
That boy was born to play football. He thinks football. He is a tough, smart player. He just, he's the epitome of a football player.
He is, and he has such a heart for Buckeye football. And I know he tells a story about, possibly considering Michigan at one point, and his father told him he would disown him if he was to go play for that team. So that was when he made the decision, and then of course he was instrumental in some of the Buckeye traditions, but then. Obviously, he was very outspoken when Earl Bruce was fired, and he was captain on that team, and really made it very well known how he felt about his coach, and he was very loyal to Earl Bruce, and put the headbands on in kind of silent protest for Earl Bruce and in solidarity for him too. So he's a very, very passionate person, and I really look up to his work ethic and what he does to prepare.
So any of you out there that are not aware, it was 1987. Earl Bruce, the Buckeyes had high expectations, a top 5 team preseason. They lost a string of very, very close games at the wire, gut-wrenching losses, entered the Michigan game at 5-4-1. Earl Bruce was fired that week prior to the Michigan game, and they went to Ann Arbor. Earl Bruce, a lame duck coach at that point, and the Buckeyes players wore headbands that said Earl across the front, and they went out and upset Michigan 23-20. Got Claire Crawford on the line. Buckeye Claire, talking Ohio State football. I also love the comment that Chris Spielman made earlier in that season. They were going to LSU to play, and he was asked about having to face the crowd in Death Valley at Tiger Stadium. And Chris Spielman responded by saying, Tiger Stadium, there's only one Tiger Stadium, and that's in Massillon.
Go Tigers. And for anyone out there who really wants to dig deep into like Ohio high school football, or just wants to know more about Massillon, which doesn't sound intriguing, but these days everyone likes a good documentary. Netflix is around for a reason. There's a documentary called Go Tigers. It's accessible enough. I'm betting you could probably even find the full thing on YouTube at this point. But it's a very, very interesting look into Ohio high school football, and specifically Massillon and that program. It's still a very dominant program.
So one of the all-time NFL greats in coaching, Paul Brown, coached at Massillon High School. He led Ohio State to a national championship. He coached the Cleveland Browns to multiple NFL championships. That franchise went to 10 consecutive championship games, won 5, lost 5. So Paul Brown is one of the greatest coaches in the history of football, hails from Massillon, Ohio.
Definitely the most successful Browns coach of all time.
Well, yes, absolutely. When the franchise is named after you, it's pretty impressive.
He did some pretty great things in Cincinnati as well. We'll thank him for that.
Yes, he did. He moved on to Cincinnati after he was fired by Art Modell, who twice drew the ire of Cleveland Browns fans.
Browns fans will never be Browns fans again because of that. They're just forever Ravens fans.
Yeah. All right, Claire. What do you think? We'll move it on to next week. Hopefully get you back here and talk Ohio State football. National Signing Day is 1 week away. The Buckeyes pretty much have their class wrapped up. It should be a really good one based on the numbers, about 10th in the nation, but based on the player rating. So if you break down the individual players, because it's a small class, it's not ranked as high as is typical, but the player ratings like top 3 in the country. So just some tremendous players coming in, and we'll have to kick around the schedule and some other good stuff.
Yeah, I'm super excited with the addition of Justin Fields and, the complexion possibly changing of the offense. With the additions on the coaching staff, there's a lot to talk about and to look forward to in February. I think we may even have a recruiting. I have some recruiting theories about what it could do for the rivalry, how it could possibly change the Big Ten. I've got all kinds of ideas floating around in there for you. So hopefully we'll be able to spit some of that next week.
Yes, you always make me smarter.
I try.
As long as I'm able to write it down and remember it. Thanks, Claire, for stopping by. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me, Mark.